This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks struggle to make headway today. Investors are moving with caution as, of course, COVID-19 infections rise in Taiwan and India. Given that these two nations are amongst the largest components on MSCI's emerging market index, it closed flat today for the first time. Now, South Africa's JSE all-share also struggling to find a clear path given the patchy trading picture in Asia. Though we did see the resource index inching up slightly today, financials and industrials both closing in the red. Also coming up on today's show, Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan in Kenya as the two countries seek to repair soaring trade relations. Nigeria's oil and gas firm to withhold payments to the Treasury this month as the cost of subsidies bite. And the plastic menace in South Africa presents a gold mine for some entrepreneurs. Well, we start off today's show in Kenya, where President Uhuru Kenyatta has held bilateral talks with his Tanzanian counterpart, Samia Suluhu Hassan. They agreed to eliminate barriers that have been hindering the smooth flow of trade and people between the two neighboring countries. Here's CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy with more.
Kenya and Tanzania have committed to re-establishing a joint commission on cooperation. The commission aims to resolve sticking issues between the two neighbors.
We have agreed to re-energize the joint commission of cooperation between our countries. Our ministers have been instructed to meet regularly to ensure that they are able to resolve small issues that crop up between the citizens of our two nations.
Trade relations between the two countries have been frosty in the recent past. Tanzania and Kenya have had a spat over tariffs and non-tariff barriers on goods. President Hassan's visit is expected to address these key issues. The two leaders agreed to tackle COVID-19 protocols at the border points as one way of easing cross-border trade.
The other thing that the president has emphasized that I also agree with is for our health ministers to meet and discuss how to simplify the process of cross-border checks for coronavirus so that our people get speedy services and ensure business moves swiftly.
The two leaders also agreed to construct a gas pipeline running from Dar es Salaam to the port of Mombasa. The renewed and constructive relationship between Kenya and Tanzania is expected to go a long way in further strengthening the already existing diplomatic ties. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's now get more insight into relations between the two nations going forward. We're now joined by Erastus Mwencha. He is a former deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission, and before that he served as the Secretary General of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. Great to have you with us on the show today, sir. Now, certainly the expectation is that this trip will reset and strengthen the somewhat frayed relations between the two nations. It, of course, is the first visit since 2016. Have there been any strong signals from both leaders so far that there will be a major change in tone going forward? Well, Mr. Erastus, I don't know if you can hear me, but let me repeat my question. Have there been any strong signals so far that we could see a major change in tone from both leaders, given the fact that they've had a somewhat frayed relationship in the past? Well, apologies. Looks like he can't hear me. We'll certainly try and get him back. Well, let's move on to another story still out of Tanzania. The country has issued a new COVID-19 travel advisory that is aimed at controlling the spread of coronavirus. Now, travelers coming from countries that have recorded cases of new coronavirus variants will be required to quarantine for about 14 days upon arrival. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo reporting.
A health ministry statement says that all travelers, whether foreign or returning residents, should present a negative COVID-19 test upon arrival. And everyone arriving from countries with a new COVID-19 variant, based on WHO listings, will face a rapid test at the point of entry, followed by 14 days mandatory quarantine at their own cost. This includes those who have traveled through these countries in the last 14 days. Foreign citizens will be required to quarantine at places designated by the government, while returning residents will be allowed to isolate themselves at home. The government is urging all residents and visitors to observe disease prevention measures like improving hand hygiene, physical distancing, and wearing face masks. Tanzania's president announced plans to set up a national COVID-19 task force to inform a new state response to the pandemic in March. The task force will, among other things, advise the government on public health measures against the COVID-19 virus and how to communicate them to the public. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now. The country's National Petroleum Corporation has warned that it will not make any remittance to the Federation account in the month of May. That is after spending around $294 million to subsidize petrol consumption in March. Now, the state-owned oil and gas firm is the biggest contributor to the national purse. The decision essentially means that there will be significantly less revenue to share amongst Nigeria's states, as of course CGTN's Deji Badmus now tells us.
Opponents of Nigeria's petrol subsidy say the disclosure of the NNPC is more like a case of the chickens coming home to roost. The government and labor unions had been engaged in a running battle over the removal of petrol subsidy, with the government saying it doesn't have the funds to sustain it.
We just have to make a choice. If government were to continue with subsidy, it means, for example, at some point that we may not even have money after subsidizing petrol to pay salaries.
Nigeria spends around $315 million monthly on petrol subsidy. The NNPC is the sole importer of refined petrol and usually deducts subsidy expense before remitting its revenue into the national purse. It now says after netting off subsidy payments, its remittance to the national till for the month of May will be zero, while that of June will be significantly less than usual.
We are still coming out from a previous allocation where 60 billion was like a shortfall. And now we are heading to double that figure, 112 billion naira. Now that's not good news at all. And it can be avoided because we have no business in subsidizing consumption. What you subsidize is production in general terms, as a matter of principle. But we have just continued on this path.
Some state governors have also been reacting to the NNPC's zero remittance alert, calling for urgent action by the federal government.
We have to look at this issue seriously. It will significantly affect even the capacity of states to pay salaries and to do what is necessary for the smooth running of government, and also funding of the security agencies, the logistic requirement of security agencies.
The government and labor unions are still locked in talks over the eventual removal of the subsidy. The unions are insisting the subsidy must remain.
We are bothered about first ability to pay and demand and supply. Recall that 42% of Nigeria are living below poverty line, according to UNDP. Apart from that, record also that minimum wage that remains 30,000 naira for a worker at the lowest level, whatever level we may call it. What this means is that cost of living would increase while living standard will significantly reduce.
For now, the central government has not reacted to the position of the NNPC. But unless it is able to look for another way to make up for the expected revenue shortfall, a number of Nigerian states will definitely be thrown into deeper financial crisis in the coming weeks. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's now turn our attention to some corporate headlines today. Drug maker Pfizer has predicted $26 billion in COVID-19 vaccine sales this year. This is a more than 70% jump from its last projection. Now, the raised goal assumes 1.6 billion doses of vaccine will be delivered in the year. It is expected to make up for more than 1/3 of Pfizer's full-year sales, with the company in supply talks with several nations for 2022 and beyond. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabian state oil producer Aramco has reported a 30% rise in profit for the first quarter of 2021. Net income rose to $21.7 billion for the quarter to March 31st from $16.7 billion a year earlier. Now, this has been attributed to a stronger oil market and, of course, higher refining and chemical margins. Meanwhile, Egypt has signed a $4.5 billion contract with France to buy 30 Rafale fighter jets. This deal will be a further boost for the Dassault-made warplane after a €2.5 billion agreement was finalized in January for the sale of 18 Rafales to Greece. Now, Egypt's defense ministry says the deal will be financed through a loan to be paid over at least 10 years. And finally, German airline Lufthansa says it will buy 10 long-haul aircraft, each from Airbus and Boeing, to replace older Airbus A340 planes and increase its fleet's fuel efficiency. Now, the investment is in line with conditions set by the German state as part of a government bailout deal. It is also in line with the carrier's policy not to invest more than depreciation and amortization. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Business rescue practitioners hand over the management of South African Airways to a new board. And Tunisia banks on geothermal energy to increase greenhouse exports.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
It hurts. Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN. Every story starts out like this. Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, South African Airways has finally wrapped up its business rescue process after 15 months. The business rescue practitioners have handed the management of the airline to the new SAA board. Now, skeptics were unsure South African Airways will ever make it into the sky again. The airline did go bankrupt after years of corruption and mismanagement. Here's Sumitra Naidu with more.
In the next few weeks, South Africa's Department of Public Enterprises will finalize an agreement with an undisclosed private investor who is expected to manage the airline in the future. Business rescue practitioners have secured an agreement with creditors that will see the airline's massive debt burden serviced over the next 3 years. This essentially takes the debt liability off the airline's hands going forward.
The so-called buyer that's supposed to be coming in to purchase an investor, we still don't know of an investor. The problem that SAA faces is it needs cash injections, and which of course means the taxpayer. And because the Public Enterprises Ministry has been negative about that, it means that the SAA still faces a big question about its monthly operations.
It's the first time that the receivership mechanism has been used to take off debt from a balance sheet. I'm not sure how legal and accounting wise it will be treated, and of course the creditors have to rely on the ability of the receiver to actually pay them.
It will be interesting to see just how SAA moves forward. Government has been bailing it out for years at the expense of the taxpayer. This year, government committed a further $750 million to help the airline, but the Treasury has made clear there's no more money. It won't be easy for SAA to get back into the market, especially with COVID-19 still lingering.
It's in a negative place, and because of COVID, which has not gone away, and world airlines have actually trimmed their seats going forward for this year. They came out with a list of seats that are bookable, and internationally, virtually every single airline has had to trim seats. So the outlook is not very healthy for SAA.
The first issue is on what scale would SAA restart? So the larger that you try and set up, the more involved it is and the more capital is required. The demand is very low at the moment. It's about 40% of what demand was in 2019. So it's definitely a difficult period to actually launch a sizable airline.
The new SAA board will be tasked with developing and implementing an interim business plan to sustain the operations while a strategic equity partnership is being finalized. SAA may have finished with its business rescue, but its recovery will be drawn out as travel remains subdued. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's now quickly go back to our top story today. Of course, Tanzania's President Hassan is in Kenya for a 2-day visit. Well, let's get more insight into the outlook for relations between the two nations going forward. We're now joined by Erastus Mwenche. He joins us again. He's a former deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission. Great to have you with us, Dr. Erastus. Now, of course, the expectation has been that this trip will sort of reset relations between the two nations, hopefully strengthen relations going forward as well. And of course, we know those relations have been somewhat frayed. This, of course, is the first visit since 2016. So have there been any strong signals yet from both leaders that we could be seeing a major change in tone going forward?
Thank you very much, Uche, for having me. And first, as you ask that important question, yes, indeed, that since 2016, this is the first visit by head of state of Tanzania, Kenya, and it also comes at a time when President Suluhu Hassan is a new president in Tanzania, only about 6 weeks in office. And in these 6 weeks, she had already made pledges in Tanzania. She addressed Tanzania Parliament last week and expressed a desire to see trade relations within the East African community reset. And immediately, of course, following that statement in Parliament, she was in Kenya today. And given the fact that the trade between the two countries is more or less balanced at times in Tanzania's favor, and knowing the strategic nature of Tanzania to Kenya, she indicated that this is a good moment for resetting it. And indeed, that is what came out in the first joint statement that was issued by the two heads of state. And so, yes, you can see that even the chemistry at that meeting pointed to the fact that these countries have an opportunity now to start on a new slate. And of course, time will tell. But given the statements he's been making, since assuming office, of one of encouraging foreign direct investment, and Kenya is one of the largest, in fact, the fifth biggest investor in Tanzania. And Tanzania has also an opportunity to export to Kenya majorly natural resources, including natural gas, which was an outcome of today's statement when they met and agreed to construct a pipeline from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi. There is much to be gained. Besides that, these countries are also members of the East African community, which again ties them together. This is one of the oldest communities in the world, but which has faced challenges majorly because of relationship between the two countries. And so, yes, there is the imperative for it to be there, and there is a desire for this relationship to be there.
Well, I want to focus in on trade specifically, because we know the two nations, they've had quite a tense trade relationship, resulting in a series of trade bans. We've seen confrontations, restrictions, retaliation, back and forth. What are your thoughts on both their priorities right now in terms of cross-border trade?
I think the challenge has been, of late, of course, there was the COVID environment which caused that frosty relationship. But even before that, and historically, there's always been this mutual suspicion between the two countries. On the Tanzanian part, there is this major belief that trade between the two countries is a zero-sum game. But if you look at the actual volume of trade that takes place, Kenya imports or exports to Tanzania about 23 billion Kenya shillings, and imports a similar amount. And so you can see it's balanced. And if you look at the trade, it's the nature of goods that are sold between the two countries, there is complementary. Tanzania has quite a lot of agricultural products, cereals in particular, minerals, and natural gas, for which they signed a trade agreement, a pipeline agreement today. Kenya exports more value-added products. And I think that is where the challenge has always been, seeing one is more industrialized. But actually, when you look at the actual volume of trade, it balances out. So it's a major one. And of course, Tanzania is also a major link in terms of Southern Africa to Eastern Africa, and a route for which Kenya uses to and fro in the countries of East Africa. So there is a lot to be gained between the two countries, and that's why today's state visit was looked at with much enthusiasm and expectations.
Well, we have run out of time, Dr. Erastus, so we do have to leave it there. But many thanks for that insightful conversation. That, of course, was Dr. Erastus Mwencha. He is the former deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission. Well, let's move on now, heading to Tunisia. The country is expanding its production and export of crops, which are produced in greenhouses that are heated by geothermal energy. The North African nation is seeking to increase output and export of vegetables to European and Gulf nations. Well, from Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with more on that.
Authorities in Tunisia have supported the launch of an innovative agricultural project in the south of the country that is tapping on the geothermal energy to grow crops. Located in a warm desert area, a region characterized by water scarcity, the farms are the first lands producing vegetables in the arid desert of the North African country. Tunisian Prime Minister and his cabinet members visited the farm in the region of Al-Hamma in the governorate of Gebes to witness how the tomatoes and other vegetables from the special cultivation site are grown.
This pilot project shows the real potential of agriculture in Tunisia. This new type of farming favors water conservation in arid zones. The state will support the implementation of similar projects which are environmentally friendly and socially responsible.
The Prime Minister added that the agricultural project will create vital employment opportunities for youth and women. The farm employs engineers, technicians as well as farmers.
The farm has a huge potential of addressing unemployment. We'll help the investor expand the project in order to employ some 5,000 people in the next few months. 5,000 jobs in this inner region are important for boosting the local economy.
President of the Tunisian Union of Agriculture and Fisheries described agriculture as a strategic sector which has achieved a high value addition and a growth rate estimated at 4.4% despite the COVID-19 pandemic.
Agriculture is the only sector showing positive indicators in terms of growth, investment and revenue. Farming is the unique economic activity in the impoverished rural areas. The future of agriculture depends on state intervention. Farmers need more incentives. Agriculture is the solution to our crisis.
The Agricultural Department asserts that a huge amount of geothermal water is available in the Tunisian Sahara, which can be used to raise output. The water is used for watering plants and for heating, which makes greenhouses more energy efficient. According to the National Institute of Statistics, Tunisia has been able to achieve agricultural self-sufficiency, posting surpluses in most products in 2020. Experts describe agriculture as a strategic sector in the North African state. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Egypt is betting on increased tourist demand ahead of the conclusion of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The North African state has witnessed higher bookings from tourists in neighboring Arab nations for the second half of this month. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The demand to visit Egypt during the final week of Ramadan and the Eid festivities that follow has been a breath of fresh air for the stricken tourism industry.
Ramadan in Egypt is different from any other Arab and Muslim country. The way it's spent here in itself is a source of attraction to the Arabs. They will be keen to come to Egypt because apart from the religious rituals, Egypt is known more for the many events that take place every night during the month, whether social or musical. There are various forms of entertainment.
Egypt received 3 million Arabs out of the 14 million visitors who jetted in pre-COVID in 2019. And they spent 3 times more than their counterparts. They usually arrive for the summer holidays, but the Ministry of Tourism has been trying to promote Ramadan as a new season for the neighbors to visit the North African state.
We have a strategy to promote tourism in the Arab countries in the coming few weeks, during Ramadan, during Eid. And I'm sure that lots of Arabs, they want to come. It's just their country's regulations because of the pandemic. The idea that we have the hotels and the hotel establishments, restaurants and touristic places open is quite appealing to the Arabs, and it's an easy exit for their long waiting of the isolation because of the pandemic.
There's been a slight easing of coronavirus restrictions in Egypt after authorities extended working hours for restaurants, cafes and malls. But the government has kept other regulations in place, like social distancing, wearing masks in public areas and maintaining 50% capacities in hotels and restaurants. The government is also inoculating all employees in the tourism and aviation sectors, which it has placed as a priority segment.
What we've been doing in the past few months is to ensure that the health and safety and regulations that we are following in the hotel establishments ensures the safety and the health and safety of the travelers.
Tourism revenue, a key source of foreign currency for Egypt, dropped by over 75% in 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic. These efforts are meant to partially sustain the industry until it fully recovers. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're going to take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. How mangroves are being used to protect Kenya's coastline. And a Kenyan innovator creates a hydropower plant from scrap material.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, now let's recap other headlines this hour. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Guinea have begun recruiting volunteers to test a new COVID-19 drug for treating patients with mild to moderate forms of the coronavirus. The study, known as Anti-COV, is reported to be the largest clinical trial in Africa for COVID-19 treatments. And the European Union says it will not observe Ethiopia's parliamentary elections slated for June 5th this year. In a statement, the EU has explained that it has cancelled the deployment of an observation mission to the country because of what it says has been a failure to agree with Ethiopian authorities on key requirements for the deployment. And Egypt's parliament has passed a law that increases penalties and jail sentences for people found guilty of bullying people with disabilities. Now, violators will face at least 2 years in jail and could pay up to $13,000 in fines. The move has been welcomed by Egyptian human rights groups and, of course, people living with disabilities. And finally, the former head of global athletics, Lamine Diack, will be allowed to return to Senegal after posting a bond with French justice. Diack's lawyers said a Senegalese football club had raised the money to pay the bond. Now, the 87-year-old Diack led the International Association of Athletics Federations, now renamed World Athletics, from 1999 to 2015. He was found guilty in September of corruption in covering up Russian doping cases and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's move on now to our series on surviving climate change. Today, we're in Kenya, where mangrove forests are considered guardians of the coastline. Now, these trees stabilize the coastline by reducing erosion from storms, surges, and tides. Mangroves also play an important role in fighting climate change. Well, CGTN now takes a look at mangrove conservation along Kenya's eastern coastline.
If we are to imagine a situation without the mangroves, that would mean there will be more cases of global warming because there'll be a high amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Another situation without the mangroves is Gazi being known as a community that is highly dependent on the fishery sector, then that would mean there will be a reduced productivity in the amount of fish that is caught, which will in turn greatly affect the livelihoods of the local communities. When name is Rahma Rashid Kivugo. I am 24 years old. I currently work with the Mikoko Pamoja community organization, which is the first community-led project in the world to engage in the sale of mangrove carbon credits. So basically, the project is located in the southern coast of Kenya, that is in Gasi Bay. We started working as a project in the year 2013. So basically, what Mikoko Pamoja does is conserve and protect the mangrove ecosystems. We work with two communities, that is the Gasi and the Makongeni communities. These are small villages constituting of about 6,000 people. Mangroves are known to be the third most productive ecosystems after the seagrasses and the salt marshes. They usually aid in the absorption of CO2 and other related greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. They are known to sequester or absorb up to 8 times more than other terrestrial ecosystems or other terrestrial forests. One, they are a habitat for the different marine species available in the ocean. They're also responsible for acting as a natural wall that shields the coastline against cyclones or flooding and all that. They're also known to serve as a protecting ground for the young fish against the predator fish. Generally, I can say that they have both ecological and economic factors, economic benefits that they bring to the people around them or the biodiversity around it.
We have many types of the mangroves, but there are some which are best for the sucking of the carbon. Like this one I'm showing you, this is the best one, which sucks the carbon 5 times than any other tree, this type of mangrove here. And this is the type also we have to find the seedlings and we plant them there in the nursery. After some months, we take them away again. We're going to plant them in the other gardens there. But the challenge is when you plant 4,000 of them, may remain about 1,000, 1,500 because some die, some go with the water. That is the challenges. Because the seed of this is just like this thing here. The seed of like this, just like this. When it drops down, when it drops down, when it is stuck there, then it keeps growing already. It's like that, just like this one. When it drops, but when it drops like that, it stands still. It's already growing in. When we sell the carbon to Plan Vivo, they do their calculation and they bring us for money. I think what we got, because for the first time when we received this money, it is when we knew that, we used to cut the mangroves, we spoiled them for the firewood and for the building the houses, but now we can get money and we can decide to do our things. That is the day which I won't forget. We have improved because now the mangroves are, even the acres we had before, there are now many of the mangroves which are growing up. Because now it's about 3 years we are closed down, no cutting, no anything from the central government. So it's nice for us because the acres which we keep them, they're now doing very well. And when we're going for monitoring there, we go for checking there, I think things are not bad. I think some years coming, the forest of mangrove will be very big. And that is why every year we have to plant some more mangroves.
Basically, mangroves are usually degraded by both natural and human-induced factors. By natural factors, we're speaking of the climatic changes. So through the global warming, we tend to notice an increased rise in the sea level. How this affects the mangroves is that when the soil comes in, it tends to suffocate the mangroves, and in that way, these trees cannot breathe, or these trees cannot obtain the nutrients that they need for survival. What previously existed was a situation where a lot of mangroves were being cut down by the communities to provide for timber and firewood needs. This led to the destruction of huge acres of mangroves. We can have an example here. This is an example of a mangrove that was previously cut down. So what usually happens is the previously cut down trees do not regenerate. Once you cut them down, they hardly come back to life. So what we do as a project is come back in to replace the exploited trees, the degraded trees. This is one of the areas that was previously degraded. It was very much degraded to an extent where there were no mangroves in this area. So what Mikoko Pamoja has been able to do is replant the lost mangroves over the years. We do it every year. We are supposed to plant 4,000 seedlings in a year. Over the years, we've been able to observe a reduced rate in the exploitation of the mangroves by the local communities. This is because they've been able to realize the benefits that come along with the conservation or protection of these ecosystems in terms of increasing the productivity of the fisheries sector. The first people to notice the benefits of the mangrove ecosystems were the fishermen in this village, because after a long-term destruction of the mangroves, they noticed a decline in the amount of fish. So at that time, it was pretty easy to convince them that they need to protect this ecosystem for their own benefit, which was going to contribute to their livelihoods.
Mangrove are one of the most threatened natural ecosystems, and I can see that between 1990s and 2000, the loss of mangroves was 1 to 2%, and if the degradation was continuing in that rate, there could have been no mangrove in the next 100 years. The cost of doing nothing means we shall continue losing mangrove. And when we lose mangrove, we shall have effect on fisheries. There'll be no fish, there'll be no harvestable wood, there'll be a lot of, the most significant part is the sea level will rise. So it will lead to destruction of properties and life. And also, critically, there will be the increased carbon emission, and which is really the major concern now under Paris Agreement. We are the first country on earth to sustainably manage, protect mangroves, restore them by using carbon credits. And that project, Mikoko Pamoja, it's well known, is the first one which is led by the community, where the community are paid to protect their mangrove through the sale of carbon credit. So the credits that they sell, they are able to plow back and support water and sanitation, education, health, and also plant more mangrove. So that project is one of our innovative ones here in Kenya. Another part we have really worked very hard is we are trying to include mangrove in the climate change agenda, the nationally determined contribution. If that is done, we shall be able to accelerate our achievement of Paris Agreement and on the SDG.
So today we'll be having our monitoring activity. This is usually done thrice in a year. This is the third and final one this year. So basically what we'll be having today is dividing ourselves into the different groups. That is 3 groups of 7 members each, and then move forward to the plots, have a brief training with the community, and go ahead with the entire monitoring activity. Zingine ziko marked. Kama ngapi za wapi na wapi na wapi.
We are monitoring a number of plots, so we are running transects from the sea towards the land. So here we are doing a transect. So we identify one tree, we mark the tree. That is our origin, that's our tree number 0. So we do a plot, a 10 by 10 square plot. Then within the plot, we count the species of mangroves within the plot. We measure the diameter at breast height for the different species. Then we also, within the plot, we also check the young juvenile trees. Then we also want to check if within the plot there are any trees that have been cut. Then once we do that, we'll be able to capture everything within the plot, then we move on to the next one. So that in our analysis, we'll be able to tell the larger area based on the different samples that we've collected. Yeah.
Okay.
So as a scientist with Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, we are coming in today to support the community and the Mikoko Pamoja organization to actually monitor their forest. So we are bringing in the technical expertise to make sure everything is being done according to book and they're following the laid down procedures and the laid down principles so that they can actually sell their carbon credit in the market without any issue. Yeah, and with time actually transfer this knowledge to the community so that over time they can actually be doing it on their own without our input. Today was interesting. From our observations, everything looks nominal. From the forest, we're seeing a lot of regeneration, which is good, which is a very good sign. But also on the other hand, we observed a number of stumps, so which clearly shows that there's some leakage coming from the forest. Basically, people are extracting wood from the forest. It's very minimal, but it's also interesting to note the areas so that we can actually improve surveillance. But so far, everything looks very, very good.
My name is Mwatimi Amadi. I am the tour guide from the Gazi Women. It's an ecotourism venture. Today we are celebrating about the launching on phase 1. We expect to get more visitors, local and foreign tourists. They come here to learn about the species of the mangrove and also the learning about the bird watching. It's about my family because my family, I am the one who I take care for anything. So I struggle myself to do better tour guiding so that I can get money to help my family.
I mean, there's the uniqueness of the mangroves, and there's also the benefit, the whole benefit that they bring to the universe. So a small effort in terms of conserving them or protecting them doesn't just only benefit the local communities, it benefits the whole globe. You're able to support the existence of life, not just the human life, but also the life of the other marine organisms that are located basically in the ocean too. I think it's essential for us to involve the younger generation in the conservation of these ecosystems, but more awareness is definitely needed out there. This should be a continuous process that only the younger generation will achieve in due time.
We need to live in harmony with nature. Nature will make us survive as humanity. We cannot distinguish, we cannot separate ourselves from nature. You have seen what COVID has done with all this restricted movement, with all this social distancing, the healing. For us to heal post-COVID, we shall heal because of natural ecosystems that are healthy and they are productive. So for my next generation, they need to understand the role of natural capital, which is the natural ecosystem, in climate change mitigation and sustainable development.
And on that note, let's take a short break now. Still to come. The plastic menace in South Africa presents a gold mine for some entrepreneurs.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, plastic waste management has become a topical issue, especially the contamination of marine and freshwater environments. Nearly 513 million tons of plastics wind up in the oceans every year. Some of the major contributors are from Africa. For example, in South Africa, research shows that only 16% of plastic is recycled. The rest is thrown into dustbins and sent to landfill sites. Well, CGTN's Yolisa Njamela visited a small-scale enterprise in Johannesburg that is focused on turning plastic waste into usable products.
According to the United Nations, around the world, people buy about 1 million bottles per minute. Half of them end up in the landfills and the ocean. The Environmental Affairs Department asserts that much of the plastic waste in the country's oceans, rivers and waterways is due to littering, inadequate waste management and overflowing landfills. But a number of South Africans are now attempting to be part of the solution. Mandle Nkosi is one of them. He started a small entity called Man Recycling.
My biggest concern is the waste that goes to the marine and get burned. It damages our environment, the ozone layer, the marine. The climate change is so affected by the failure to recycle, especially in the rural areas. That's why I'm saying people must recognize this is a huge opportunity for us to venture into a new business.
While always concerned about plastic waste in his community, desperation led him to this industry.
It was a matter of bringing bread on the table for my family. I was really desperate because I lost my job. I was not working at the time. I started slowly and small, but eventually grew to what it is today. I was towing a trolley from the street, and I managed to save very well, some good savings.
Then a short while later, his local municipality recognized his efforts and gave him access to many areas where he could pick up large amounts of waste. These days, Man Recycling operates from a secure building and collects over 18 tons of plastic waste a month. This plastic waste is then turned into usable products.
This is a storage site. It's like a warehouse. All this stuff that comes from this different transfer station comes here for sorting and the packaging so that we can send it to the correct mills. We collect a number of different products, like the plastics. As you know, plastics are different. The beverage container plastics is called the PET. Plastics, we collect that and we sort it, package it according to the color. The clear ones one side, the green ones one side, the brown ones one side. We also deal with the HDPE, they call it HDPE. It is the plastic that contains most of the time the milk, amasi, your jik, your handy, all that kind of stuff, you know, the plastics are totally different.
Nkosi has recently been awarded a certificate from PET Recycling Company, or PETCO, in recognition of his work. PETCO supports recyclers with community programs, educational material, and awareness programs on recycling. Yulison Jamila for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Kenya's government has promised that by 2030, most Kenyans will be connected to the country's power grid. But as many people, especially in the villages, continue to hope that this goal will be achieved, one man in Muranga County has already connected thousands to electricity that he generates using a power plant, which he created using scrap material. Here's CGTN's Enoch Sikolia reporting.
This is John Magiro from Muranga County. It's evening time and he's doing a routine check on his power line at Njumbi Market. He owns a mini hydropower plant that supplies electricity for security lights here, free of charge. His story began more than 10 years ago. Life was so difficult then, as his village had no access to electricity.
The community, they were using mainly the paraffin, and also the Kenya-Power, it was not allowed.
He was inspired to do this after observing his brother's bicycle dynamo that generated light when the wheel turned. From there, John Magiro was able to build a power plant at these falls along River Ngondo using scrap metals and a bigger dynamo. His concept was very simple. Use the power of water to turn a dynamo, generating electricity. He has been upgrading the power plant since the National Environmental Trust Fund came on board. Instead of a dynamo, he now uses turbines.
One thing about Magiro is that it's quite reliable. The power is always available. The guy is there to make sure that whenever there are issues, they are being sorted very fast.
Water at high speed and pressure is what turns turbines. Using trees, stones and concrete, Magiro redirected water from River Ngondo, creating a water reservoir.
Also, the reservoir make the head of the hydropower to be a bit higher.
Now, when water runs through this giant pipe, it gathers pace and gains pressure. As it passes through turbine runners located in the power station, each runner rotates, producing mechanical energy. It's then passed through an electrical generator, which is connected on a shaft. This is how Magiro Hydro Power Station is converting water's potential energy into electrical energy, ready for distribution.
The time that I was using the bicycle dynamo, it was generating around 0.5 watts. But right now, the kilowatt that you are generating in Kahedwine, you are generating around 25 kilowatts. After that, in Kiawabogo, you are generating around 18, and also Gitoko, you are generating 10. So all the power that you are generating in Kiawabogo and Gitoko, they are synchronized in Kahedwine.
The impact of electricity supply on this village has been huge. John Kinywa operates a shop at Njumbi Shopping Center. He says Magiro Power has helped his business a great deal.
I use it for lighting my shop, power my radio, phone, and weighing machine. It doesn't have many power blackouts.
Currently, over 650 households in Magiro's village are connected to his power plant, but the 28-year-old is planning to expand and connect even more villages to his power grid. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at currency markets. With the US dollar drifting higher today, emerging market currencies were under pressure. South Africa's rand was 0.6% weaker, as of course the dollar rebounded from a fall in the previous session, triggered by weaker than expected US economic data. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.